and welcome back to another episode. And today is going to be centered around whether or not you're a college student. So if you're a college student thinking about where you want to go after graduation, you might be considering one of our major cities, Miami. So today I'm diving into the pros and the cons of moving to Miami, and I'll be chatting with my sister, a current college student, to see what she thinks about based on my research. So let's get into it. Smash or pass Miami. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So for everyone watching, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Sabrina. I'm Allie's older sister. I'm going to be a senior in college. I go to Davidson College, and I study art history and political science.
Wow, so cool.
Thank you.
And perfect. So let's talk about Miami. First question. When you think about Miami, when you hear let's move to Miami after college, like what's your first reaction?
I think about how expensive it is. Growing up here, I've known how expensive it is to go out to eat, to hang out with friends, and I've heard my parents talk about housing prices, so that's my biggest concern.
No, I totally understand that. I mean, when I was compiling my research, one of the biggest components of it was people's concerns with the cost of living in Miami.
Yeah.
And those concerns are valid because it's getting kind of crazy to live here. Rent has skyrocketed. I mean, some sources show that it has gone up over 30%.
Wow.
In the past few years. And do you think that's something you'll be able to handle, like coming straight out of college?
Personally, no, because a lot of students study abroad right before they graduate, and puts a big dent in their bank account, so it's hard to come right out of college and live on your own. And also the Miami lifestyle is very expensive. Everybody always looks their best, drives the nicest cars, wears the nicest clothes. So it's hard to keep up, especially right out of college where you don't have a lot of money.
No, totally, I understand. And you're not alone. It's something that a lot of grads are currently struggling with. I mean, listen to this. When I was researching, I found out that our current generation or group of young adults are the most in debt compared to any other group of young adults. So they're all coming out of college like they're really in debt, the most compared to any other group in history. And now they're trying to pay rent for one of the most expensive cities in our country. You know, it's a struggle.
Not worth it.
And on top of this pricing issue, you know, there's a lot of corruption when it comes to living in Miami. As one of my articles said, part of the reason why people struggle to find apartments and to find places to rent is because the landlords are corrupt, and a lot of these landlords are a part of big corporations, and sadly and unfortunately the Florida government supports these big corporations, so they're able to raise prices without any backlash. And you know, a lot of times they're even able to kick people out of their apartments so that if they can't afford to pay this new higher price, not sorry, but you have to get kicked out of the apartment. And the sad part of this is Florida used to have a law where they had to have a certain amount of apartments per complex that were reserved for lower income residents, but most apartments have completely gone away with that and are able to. So, you know, it's a struggle, and it's sadly and unfortunately a corrupt city.
The reality.
And, you know, just to sort of make you feel as though you are not alone, that this is a big concern for young adults today, I conducted an anonymous survey targeting people ages 19 to 24.
Oh, perfect.
And the goal of this survey was to see if Miami's infrastructure influences their decisions about living here in the near future. And surprisingly, only 22% of our respondents considered traffic, infrastructure, or transportation to be a primary reason as to not live in Miami. And when I asked them what was their primary concern, it was cost of living. Wow. So while my goal of this survey was to see how much of an impact infrastructure had on these young adults' decision on moving to Miami, it ended up showing me that, you know, infrastructure is kind of pushed to the side. It's not really a main concern for many, whereas cost of living is, and it's something like at the forefront of their. So let me get your personal opinion. Is infrastructure a major component in your decision, and what do you think about Miami's infrastructure?
So infrastructure is definitely something I am looking into as I consider where I want to live post-grad.
Totally.
Because in a city like New York, you're paying $10-15 a week for a Metro card. You're not paying for gas. You get to walk everywhere. But in Miami, it's a lot of driving. The traffic has gotten worse over the years. You're paying for Ubers.
Mm-hmm.
I've never taken the bus in Miami. I never felt safe enough to do so. I have Metroed. I do like the Metro, but it doesn't take you to a wide variety of places. It's kind of just a straight shot to downtown.
Yeah.
I've taken the People Mover. That I like a lot too. But then again, it's not the most convenient. There are a lot of delays. And it doesn't take you, everywhere you need to go.
No, totally. And, it's funny that you say that because an article I read giving an overall grade of Miami's infrastructure gave Miami's infrastructure an F.
Oh,
specifically the Metro Mover, because people claim it just takes you north, south, not very much. But the People Mover did get a B. And people claim that, the People Mover is much more helpful because it takes you through the tight-knit city and it's easy to work with. So, it's funny that you said that.
I really appreciate how it's free, too.
Yes, that is, especially with the cost of living, it could help compensate for. Okay, so, we've covered transportation, we've covered cost of living, but, one big question that we haven't covered is job opportunities, career opportunities. And I know as somebody coming out of college that this is something really on your mind. So tell me, what are you looking for? What do you want to work in?
Yeah, so despite my major, I'm actually in the tech industry. I have a job with Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so I'm lucky enough that Amazon's here. They're opening up here in Miami.
That is great that you brought that up because I was just thinking about that.
Really?
First of all, congrats on your Amazon job. That is huge. And second of all, wow. I mean, this is the city for you. Miami is being called, quote unquote, the new Silicon Valley. It is a booming industry. In fact, one of the articles that I did my research on, it was a Forbes article, and the author says that Miami is no longer becoming a vacation spot. Yes, it's beautiful. People come down here to vacation, but it's turning the corner and it's now becoming a serious hub for technology companies, for finance companies, for hospitality. And, the author literally says, quote unquote, that it's buzzing with opportunities. In fact, these companies are looking for long-term employees and they're bringing in high-paying jobs. And they're even talking about building brand new college campuses like the Vanderbilt College. And they do this because they want to fuel these industries, and they're really looking to not only plant the tree, but insert the roots deep into the ground. So for job opportunities, I mean, would you give Miami a pro, or what do you think for yourself?
I would. I think it may depend on the industry, but I would say Miami's definitely a pro, especially because everybody's moving down here and opening up their businesses.
Yeah, and I mean, especially for you as a fellow Amazon worker, I mean, this is great.
Yeah.
And you sort of get that tropical climate, and that's going to segue us into talking about climate.
Okay.
So, I want to get your opinion on it. What is your overall, what do you think about Miami's climate?
Yeah.
Concerns, this and that?
I go to school in North Carolina. So, come winter, I'm always just yearning to come down here. But I do have some concerns about climate change in Miami. A lot of scientists say one day it's going to be underwater. I would love to spend the rest of my life here, but that is something I'm always thinking about in the back of my mind. Is this a good city to invest in and kind of root myself in for the rest of my life?
Yeah, no, totally. And, that concern is understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, let's first talk about the pros. Miami is beautiful. There's sunshine, there's palm trees, there's sand, there's ocean water.
The bio life.
Exactly. And I mean, this, despite how the cost of living can be a burden on young adults' mental health, right? Looking back, there was an article that said, the problem isn't necessarily the cost of living, but it's the self-esteem. These young adults, once they're in debt, and they can't afford to live in these places, their self-esteem gets lowered. And what does that do to their mental health? Well, it deteriorates their mental health. So the author was saying, it's not so much the cost of living to blame for their poor mental health, but rather their low self-esteem. But on the contrary, living in Miami, where there's sunshine and brightness, that helps your mental health a lot, whether you want to believe it or not. Waking up and seeing the palm trees and the water and the sunshine versus waking up and seeing brick, cement, concrete jungles.
Treeless, leafless trees.
So, that is something to think about.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Miami's climate change it's a serious problem. I mean, sea level rise, it's a very big concern. And to go back onto cost of living, the problem now is that many insurance companies are raising their prices and don't really want to cover as many homes anymore because they're not getting much out of it.
All at risk.
So that is something to think about. And, have you ever thought about like any heat related sicknesses and diseases? Because that's something I know a lot of people get concerned about. Heat strokes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I haven't personally, but come summer, you want to spend time outside. Sometimes you just can't even do it because it's just unbearable. It's too hot. The humidity. So it's difficult sometimes.
No, totally. And, it's a real thing. Heat sicknesses in Miami are real and they're high.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people every day suffer from heat strokes and heat-related sicknesses, and it's something to be concerned about, but I wouldn't necessarily claim that it should hold you back from moving here.
And something else to add is that we're lucky enough that we grew up in Miami. We know how to handle the sun and the heat. But I come back here for spring break with all my friends who are from up north or from different places across the country. They all leave Miami with sun poisoning, not knowing how to, handle the heat, how to protect themselves from the sun. So it is a risk for people who aren't from here and want to start a life down here.
No, totally. And I completely understand. But ultimately, I mean, at least my take is that, look, it's something that you should obviously understand and take account into. But I don't necessarily think it should limit one from moving here.
Oh, for sure. I agree.
And let me ask you something. What are your thoughts on hurricanes? I mean, tropical storms.
Yeah.
That's a big issue many people face here.
I do think growing up here I am kind of desensitized to the idea of a hurricane just because we've lived through so many. They are very scary, and I think with climate change they're only getting worse. And I do think that is a factor that can definitely deter somebody from moving down here. And I do think it is a valid concern to have and a valid reason not to move to Miami, because with time I feel that they're only going to get worse. And if you're investing a lot in, property down here and trying to start a life down here, a hurricane can take that all away.
Yeah, totally. And especially with the problem with insurance companies like not wanting to cover these homes.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is something that is heavily weighted in our pros and cons. Okay, so moving on now past the climate, I want to talk about the social life in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And what are your thoughts on that?
I love the social life here. And that is definitely something when I tell my friends, I'm from Miami, they're like, wow, you must have so much fun. I'm jealous. I would love to go to Miami. Mm-hmm. And everybody my age wants to come down here, even if it's just for a vacation. But I do think that it's a very expensive lifestyle and a very expensive social life.
Yeah.
And that could add a lot to the cost of living.
No, totally. And, I think that with the nightlife here in Miami does come some challenges. And I wanted to be real about that too with you.
Yeah.
I came across this peer-reviewed study by, I believe his name was James Incardi.
Oh, okay.
And it looked at the relationship between drug use and crime in Miami, and over nearly 20 years. So before I get into it, I want your take on, because Miami does have such a prominent social life and nightlife, is drugs and drug life something that scares you or has an effect on you? Give me your opinion on that.
It is something that I try to stay away from. And I do believe that with drugs comes danger, and oftentimes, it is related to crime because it's an illegal activity and you're just putting yourself in a dangerous position where you're more vulnerable to crime-related activities. And that is something I try to stay away from just so I feel safer.
No, totally. And, it's funny that you say that because in this article, he argued that, let's say, drug use doesn't necessarily cause crime, but rather they grow together. And when you're in a place like Miami where the party culture can be super tempting, the environment can make it very easy for young adults, especially newcomers, to fall into these risky situations. And ultimately, they found that in some cases, especially people who inject drugs, they end up doing behaviors like theft, prostitution, and they get part of this like risky situation cycle that, and it, reading it and seeing you here as a young adult really made me think about how important it is to know your surroundings when you're in Miami and to have a strong support system if you're moving here. So while it does have a fun, glamorous life, you do have to be careful. Yeah. But I do have to argue that I feel that this is something that you genuinely have to be aware of no matter where you live. And you're going to come across these challenges. And I just think that no matter where you live, and even if you choose Miami or if you don't, I recommend knowing your surroundings and having a good support system.
I 100% agree. Drugs are definitely everywhere. You're going to encounter them pretty much anywhere when you're going out and as you're getting older. And it's just important to know to stay away and to know to be safe and make the right decisions that, will lead to you having the most safest, yet also a fun night at the same time.
So moving on past jobs and nightlife, what is your take on, the cultural aspect of Miami? How do you feel about the culture here?
I love that it's really a melting pot for a lot of different cultures. When I moved to North Carolina to go to school, it was kind of a culture shock to be somewhere where it's predominantly white and predominantly a very southern traditional culture.
Yeah.
And I do miss the diversity that Miami offers.
No, totally. And I honestly, at least in my opinion, take that as a pro in moving to Miami. Sure. I mean, it's just a huge melting pot.
It's very mind-opening.
Exactly. And, moving aside from the nightlife that we just talked about, Miami is also sort of becoming a hub for wellness and longevity.
Oh, wow.
So despite all the drugs that we talked about, Miami does have a big mindset in wellness. And I read an article from the Miami Herald, which is a local news article here. And it was called, "What's Cooking in That One Pot?" Right? And basically, it was talking about how a group of moms teamed up with a chef to bring nutritious cooking to their neighborhood. And what stood out to me is that they were talking about how they cook these healthy meals and it helps them create a culture of health and connection in their own homes. And they wanted to spread that throughout Miami. And they feel that lately Miami has been sort of gaining this connection and that there's a big connection now between cooking meals and going out to eat and having these healthy meals and creating a culture of health and wellness. And in fact, in this article, they said that Miami is becoming a blue zone. And I don't know if you're familiar with a blue zone, but what do you know about them?
I know that blue zones are places around the world that have a lot of people who live to 100 or over 100 years old.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, blue zones are where people live longer, healthier, happier lives. And the article ultimately argued that Miami has a lot of the key ingredients to become a major blue zone. Amazing weather, cultural traditions,
the ocean,
centered around community, food, and not even just food, but healthy food, the ocean, healthier habits, spaces to grow. People are able to go outside much easier. And it connects really well with just this overall ability to create a healthier lifestyle. So while some people might think Miami is just a party scene, there's people arguing on the other side that, no, Miami's becoming a place for longevity, for healthier lives. And I really think that's something you should consider when deciding whether to move here.
For sure. And I think that, Miami has a lot of run clubs that can also help somebody adjust to the social scene here and make new friends. I notice fitness classes are the new thing to be involved in Miami. Food, everybody looks for the healthy alternative. And like you said, it's very community oriented. Everybody tries to be outside as much as possible, spend time at the beach. It's a very, you know, while it's a lot of fun, it's also a very relaxing environment where people are also making sure they're in their top peak health at all times.
Yeah, no, totally. And to sort of wrap this up, because I feel we might be going a little straying too afar from our audience at this point. I'm going to kind of center it back in. And, the prime reason why I invited you today, sort of to talk, was to help you figure out ultimately if Miami is the place for you to live.
Yeah.
And I feel that with my research that I compiled and sort of our opinions and our conversations, that we were able to really go into depth and discuss the pros and the cons of Miami. And I sort of want to get your full input if you still have any questions, and ultimately what you've succumbed to and what you've decided based on our conversation. And it's totally fine if you think, hey, I need a little more time to decide, but just give me your overall opinion.
I would love Miami to be the city for me to live in. I think if I just have to be financially responsible to save up enough money to live here and to also sustain that lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But I would recommend that anybody my age looks into living here, because it's such a fun city that offers so much, from the climate to the social scene to the diversity. It's really such a unique city that I feel like everybody should try to experience at least at one point in their life.
Yeah, and I totally agree. So, on your opinion, do you think that the cons sort of outweighed the pros, or the pros outweighed the cons? How do you feel?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah, I agree.
I
Sort of
do,
feel it's
yeah.
like a good balance, and it's kind of more tailored to what you consider a heavier con and a heavier pro.
I do think that if you don't have the support system here, the cons do outweigh the pros.
Yeah.
If with finances and, climate change, I'm lucky that I have a family here that I can always rely on. If I need to live in my house for a few years while I get on my feet, I can do that. But somebody who's moving here on their own, who isn't financially stable, that's something difficult to do.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I really hope that I do see you in Miami and that you choose to live here.
Well, I hope I see you in Miami too.
And I hope that this becomes a place where you can start your future. And I hope that you could spread the word to your friends and sort of help them evaluate whether this is the place for them. Because I feel like this conversation and evaluation really got us somewhere.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your night, everyone. Bye-bye.